what I used to do at the beginning of the sessions, and we had a lot of resistance and negativity initially, but I used to take the first 2 hours of the workshop and basically say, what's not working for you? What's getting up your nose and irritating you at work at the moment? And I'd get this long list of all the woes that they had. I put them up on the flip chart. Get a general consensus as to which are the 10 most important things that are affecting everybody in that room. And these were people from cross-functional representation across the organisation and different levels. So we had a good mix of the problems that were real in that organisation. And we start with the most important one for all of them, and we start to work with the crowd, the group that was there. And I'd ask them simple questions like, so what's happening now in relation to your workplace, in relation to this particular problem? What's your behaviour that's doing this? Have you tried anything that works to get out of that? That didn't work. What part of it didn't work? How could you possibly change that so that it might work better next time? And I was using questions like this, very simple, focused on getting them to boost out of that orbit all the time, aiming towards where they wanted. And bit by bit, I found that I was asking similar questions at almost every session. And these questions were getting breakthroughs for people. Then one day, one of the groups completed that first 2-hour session, and then I said, we'll take a break now, and then we'll go into a training segment, training a particular skill that was part of the skills that we were passing across to them. And one of the fellows said, do you mind if I ask if you can do something else this afternoon? And partly because, or mainly because, I liked to adapt to what they needed, rather than me thinking that they needed what we're going to do that afternoon, what was scheduled that afternoon. I said, sure, what would you like to learn? And it really was a surprise to me. He said, can you teach us to do what you just did in that last 2 hours? And I said, no, I'm not sure, because I didn't know exactly how I did it. I said, why do you want to do that? He said, if we know how to do that, he said, we came in here today not wanting to be here, bloodied from the past 6 weeks or whatever in the workforce, trying to implement the change, and we found it really difficult out there. We came in here to try and get you to tell us how to do it, but you didn't tell us how to do it. You asked us the questions and we figured it out for ourselves. We'd like to know how to ask the questions so we can take that into the workplace and get the people in the workplace to figure it out for themselves. And I thought, okay, this is possible. And inside I was saying, holy crap, how do I teach them this stuff? Because I don't know this stuff myself. I know I do it, but I do it intuitively, and it's not something I know how to teach. So I sat down with I had an internal consultant from their company who was a colleague, and he's very, very good. And we sat down during the break and thought, how do we identify what the model is that I'm working with for a start? I know I ask questions, but there's no pattern to it that's discernible for me. I know that I ask similar questions a lot of the time. So we said, let's just reiterate that exercise after the break, and then we'll try and model it. So I sat down with him and figured out how to do this. We had one person work with one flip chart, another with another flip chart. I knew that I asked questions. I knew they gave answers. So on one flip chart, we wrote the questions, question 1, question 2, question 3. On the other, I had somebody else write the answers, answer 1, answer 2, answer 3. It didn't take long to figure out that the answers really were irrelevant to the whole thing. They were the outcomes of the questions. And I looked at the questions and I could see, we had at that stage 14 questions written up. I could see a pattern arising already that I hadn't seen before. So I continued on a bit more and then said, okay, let's stop now. I'm going to teach you these questions. How to ask them, when to ask them, how to know when to ask them, because I could figure that much out at that point. And we showed them how to do it. And they practiced it among themselves, and it worked. They could all do it. And they didn't know how to do this before, and I didn't know how to do it before either. They were really pleased with this because they could see they had something that could really transform the front line, that could really get people to think differently and to take responsibility and accountability differently, and to own the changes that were going on themselves and to create the change themselves instead of being directed towards it. So then I began to look at which questions worked best from that perspective, and I developed, I think back then it was about 24 questions, which when worked in particular sequences would incrementally shift the focus of awareness and ability towards an outcome where the person who was on the receiving end of the questions would go from having a problem to multiple solutions with full commitment, full ownership of the solution themselves, without me telling them anything about how to do what they had to do. So they were having breakthroughs with problems that were, up until that point, insurmountable, extremely difficult for them to solve, were costing millions of dollars in the business, and in anywhere between about 15, sometimes even shorter, sometimes a couple of minutes, but generally between about 15 and 30 minutes, these insurmountable, difficult, expensive problems were resolved with multiple strategies and full involvement, full engagement, full ownership, full commitment at the other end, and accountability. And they also learned then to take that to work with those questions with other people, so they could engage a lot of other people in a more collaborative fashion to deal with the issues that worked across different silos, different boundaries, with customers, with suppliers, whatever the case was. And it really came down to a set of very simple questions and how they were executed that made all this happen. And I ultimately aimed at, initially I called that the Empower process. It was a very, very empowering process for everybody involved. And then renamed it later the MasterProcess, because I realized how extensively this particular process could work in any business with almost any function. It wasn't just related to solving problems. You could use it for strategy, you could use it for conflict resolution, you could use it for coaching, for facilitation, for dealing with conflict in an organization or resistance to change. All of those factors involve taking somebody from being stuck in this orbit around the Earth to getting to somewhere different. So the process was one of giving that kickstart and then taking it out and locking it onto the target and adapting along the way. So that was how the MasterProcess came about. What we found was that it took me 2 or 3 years to get the core of that MasterProcess refined to such a degree that I could teach it easily to people and they'd get it pretty much straight away and apply it right across the board. A number of refinements were needed from that first episode. But once we started using that process as the core process for people who were engaged with change in organizations, we found it accelerated the change process phenomenally. So that what would previously have taken 2 or 3 years to make change, that first job was 3 years to get the culture to change, but we could do that now in a year or less with a large organization, maybe a year and a half. It was a really difficult one. For smaller organizations, in 3 to 6 months, because it's such an incredibly powerful and flexible and fluid process. And it shifts the way people think, it shifts the way they relate, it shifts the way in which they do things. It applies to, as much to innovation as it does to solving problems or to dealing with even such simple things as delegation. The way in which you delegate, you can use this process to get the minds aligned so there's not a misalignment when something is done and then you have to correct it. With project management, project planning and the like, it works absolute wonders when you're working with a group of people to deal with the issues that are coming up through a project and getting them resolved. So it has a huge range of applications in business, and even just by itself, without any other structure around it for change, you'll get a significant cultural change from having this type of process embedded throughout an organization. And as far as I know, there's nothing else that's similar to it that I've seen anywhere in the world. But if you also tie it in with a whole-scale process for moving the entire organization, transforming the entire organization, it just gets it done in a much shorter period of time.